let's talk about Shards of Honor and Barrayar by Lois McMaster Bujold. So these are the first two books with the internal chronology of the Vorkosigan Saga, which is a hybrid space opera, military sci-fi series. They're books, novels 1 and 7 in publication order. There are also some novellas in there. And they're in this omnibus, Cordelia's Honor Together, which I think is a US-only edition, but you can obviously find it on A-Books or similar websites, eBay, etc. Shards of Honor is the first book. Barrayar was the 7th novel, and Barrayar won the Hugo and Locus awards for Best Novel and was nominated for the Nebula. And they together act as a prequel, really, to the main Vorkosigan Saga, which is about Miles Vorkosigan. So it's inbuilt, and you see this on the blurb here, it's inbuilt that these are, well, these novels form the love story of his parents, and the blurb says so, as I say. And by the time Barrayar was published, this was explicit. You know, there'd already been these 5 novels about Miles Vorkosigan, and then this is a flashback novel. So that's not really a spoiler. I don't think that counts as a spoiler. It's partly then the romance of Cordelia and Naismith and Aral Vorkosigan. It's an enemies to lovers trope with different sides in Interstellar Rivalry. It's partly a military sci-fi with thriller elements. And I'm not going to say much more about plot details. I'll say a little bit, but I won't say much more about plot details to avoid spoilers, especially because you're talking about a big leap in time, you know, several years worth between the start and the end of the novel, and therefore the kind of story of those characters. So this is Bujold, and so naturally her big strengths are characters, character relationships, and world building as well. The enemies to lovers trope, so character relationships, it's well executed, partly because it's open and it's obvious. Sometimes a trope is a lot better if it's just there and no one is surprised by it, because you just say, you front load it, this is the kind of thing that's going to happen, and then what you're doing is you're investigating not the big twists or surprises in the relationship, but openly examining the development of the relationship and considering how it works. So Shards of Honor is really about really about that side of it, the love story proper, the backdrop of the interstellar rivalry between Cordelia's beta colony or beta colony and Aral's Barrayar. They both want to explore certain areas. They both have astro-political interests in certain systems, and that leads them to clashes in different contexts. And that's how they come across each other. Now, Cordelia is a typical beaten, progressive, democratic, what we would call, I suppose, nowadays liberal. Aral is, by her standards, very typical Barrayan. He's obsessed with honour, he's obsessed with noble politics. There's a lot of interesting interplay in the book over these values, kind of the way that Cordelia, who is the POV character for both books, how she deals with Barrayar and with Aral's own values. And she's often frustrated or cynical or critical, but we do also see how Aral's values impact and change her, and why she values them in turn. And the other characters are also, so that's, you know, you've got these two characters like that, who are, I think, well realised, but also there are other characters who are equally well realised, if less central, with compelling arcs there, particularly Aral's, for me at least, Aral's father, Count Pieter Vorkosigan, Emperor Eza Vorbara, Sergeant Bathari, who's a mentally traumatised bodyguard. They're always competing values and purposes in characters and between characters. There's discussions of the ends versus the means, what different characters want, why they value what they value, and the ways that beliefs affect people. I've said in my review of The Curse of Chalion, a fantasy book by Bujold, that she's very good at fantasy religion. There's no fantasy religion here in the same way. You know, that's not the context or culture of the book. But there's a similar thing about value and philosophy. World building is also strong, and it's funny because a lot of people I see criticise Bujold's world building. I think they say it's very basic or it's not really good. You know, they'll be like, oh, it's, you know, pretty glossed over world building. She's just a character writer. She's a great character writer, not great at world building, and I really disagree, because she's very interested in culture. I think what people mean is she doesn't have crazy inventive world concepts. This isn't Ian M. Banks, for instance. This isn't, nor is it the kind of technical side of things, like or semi-technical, like someone like Andy Weir or Kim Stanley Robinson might be interested in. That's not the kind of world building she's doing. But I think her creative genius for world building lies in cultures and in ideas, and how the two intersect, cultures and ideas. You see this in The World of Five Gods, the books, which I've reviewed one of, as I say. You see it here. She draws, like David Drake, she draws... David Drake is a great military sci-fi writer who I will get around to reviewing. She draws on real-world history. She spins it. She extrapolates from it. She says, well, what would happen if some of these cultural trends or ideas happened in this context in space? She draws on real-world cultures as well. So Barrayar is a world with several, a number of Slavic influences or a slightly Slavic feel. Not wholly. There are different ethnic groups that go into the making of Barrayar, but strongly Slavic in background. I think Barrayar Russian is a basic language, for instance, maybe the basic language, and even Barrayar English, which is their kind of global written language, was in Cyrillic characters during the period where they were isolated from the rest of the galaxy. Beta Colony, on the other hand, seems a lot more classically Anglophonic. Written in the 80s, of course, you got some degree of late Cold War in that, of the idea of a Slavic culture and an Anglophone culture coming together, and the ways that culture clash works. It's also, Barrayar is driven by family loyalty, noble politics, honour codes. It's violent, it offends some or many of our modern sensibilities and values. But it's also a naturally, physically beautiful world. It's got courageous and honourable people. And, you know, when you read about some of the decisions people make and things they do, you think, wow, there is the fact those difficult honour codes and social values are there informs these incredible decisions people make. And it's also exciting. The reason it's on Barrayar rather than Beta Colony is that I think, and I've not read the other books, and I'd be pretty sure you'd get more of Beta Colony in the future, but I think at least part of what's going on is that Barrayar is easy to make exciting over the course of multiple books. Beta Colony is what we might think of as a progressive utopia. A big focus on social equality, technological excellence, and technology leading society. But it's one with disquieting dystopic elements as well. For instance, the medicalisation of everything. You say you just think something, or this is your version of events, and you get patronising nods and a kind of, oh well, let's sort that out with medicine and get what we want out of the situation instead. It's a bit chaotic at points because everyone's arguing and always wants a say, but on the flip side, there's also strict controls on things like having kids. You need licenses. There are caps. You know, it's something where it's not always easy to make decisions for yourself. So in that sense, there's in its own way a strong collective environment. Beta Colony is part of the reason for that is Beta Colony is a less naturally rich world. It's not as friendly to human life as Barrayar, so that's part of the problem. So you get these ideas interacting, particularly I think, though Shards of Honor is the meeting or meetings and the initial kind of culture clashes, you really get those ideas interacting in Barrayar, the back half of this, where Cordelia has to come to grips with being in the thick of technologically advanced noble politics as she tries to help Aral on Barrayar. So I think that's the sort of the theatre in which Bujold gets those ideas interacting. So characters, world really work. They interact well. They're compelling. The plot is enjoyable and functional. Again, I think I've even seen some criticisms that say, oh, essentially it's all very hackneyed, the plot. I wouldn't say that. I don't think that's the right way to look at it. I think it's essentially that Bujold is quite good. As I say with the enemies to lovers trope, I think a thing she does well is to say, this is just the thing that's happening. This is the kind of arc. There are mysteries in there. There are things you don't know about. There's discoveries, and that's also true with her World of Five Gods novels and novellas. She's generally pretty good sometimes at saying, oh, I wonder why this is going on. You'll have to read to find out. But on the whole, her plots are upfront and open and very much like, this is the kind of thing this is, aren't you interested in seeing how these characters deal with it, and the exact modulations, the exact small differences and personalizations, what makes it unique. Chris, maybe the one criticism I have, beyond saying it's not literally the best plot that's ever existed in either book, sometimes Cordelia's point of view covers both books, as I say. It can get too much. She's an interesting and enjoyable character. I like her. And I think you want the perspective of the beaten outsider, particularly in Barrayar, where it's on Barrayar. And I think it works in Shards of Honor too. But sometimes I just wanted it someone else's perspective who might think something different about the situation, who might react differently or have a different internal monologue. Even someone like Count Pieter or Lady Vorkosigan, someone who's just very different. I think there's a reason Aral Vorkosigan is not, and there's a few reasons actually, but Aral Vorkosigan is not a point of view character, and I think I could affirm and defend that. But I just sometimes wanted something different, and I'm not sure how that would work structurally, but that was my instinct. Maybe just sometimes Cordelia's perfect understanding of situations and amazingly correct views on things grated. As I say, she's a great character, so I'm not complaining too much. It's also fair to say that Barrayar is definitely a better book than Shards of Honor. Shards of Honor is good. It's fun. It does the things it wants to do well. It's a very good introduction into the world on its own. But Barrayar is a great book. Barrayar, deservedly a multiple award winner, with just some very and dealing with all kinds of themes which don't come up necessarily in military or political sci-fi very often. Things around parenthood and disability and things like that, and just dealing with those themes. Interesting, something that someone like David Gemmell, the fantasy writer in military fantasy, heroic fantasy, does very well. But yeah, interesting things like that which are not commonly dealt with. So I thought it was a great introduction to the Vorkosigan Saga. I'm going to read more. Hopefully I'll enjoy that too. If you've read either of these books, particularly if you've read both, tell me what you think in the comments, and tell me what your favourite books in the saga are. Well, till next time.